Nia Mwend was 34 and living the life most people dream about. She had a good job as a bank manager, a cozy home in the suburbs, and a husband she truly loved. Everything seemed perfect, until it all came crashing down in a single moment. One morning, David, the man she thought would stand by her forever, handed her divorce papers. He accused her of cheating, something she never did. Nia thought the truth would protect her, but in court, David's lies sounded more believable than her honesty. When the final decision came, she lost everything: the house, the car, even the money she had worked years to save. In just a few weeks, her entire life disappeared. She packed what she could into a small duffel bag and walked out of the home she once decorated with love. The friends who used to call her inspiring suddenly stopped replying to her messages. Their silence hurt more than the divorce itself. With nowhere else to go, Nia ended up at a women's shelter in Soweto. Nights there were long and cold, filled with quiet sobs she tried to hide under a thin blanket. She'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how her life had turned so quickly. But even in her lowest moments, something inside her refused to die. Every night, she whispered to herself, half prayer, half promise. I'll rise again. I don't know how, but I will. And somehow deep down she believed it. Life after the divorce was nothing like Nia had ever imagined. She went from managing millions at the bank to scrubbing floors for a few $100 a week. Most days, she took cleaning jobs in offices, schools, or people's homes, anything that paid enough to buy food. She never complained, even when her hands cracked from harsh detergents or when her back ached from bending over all day. At night, she went back to the women's shelter in Soweto, where she shared a small bed with another woman. But sometimes, when the shelter was too full, she slept on park benches or under bus stops. She'd wrap herself in her old coat and pray the rain wouldn't come. The streets were harsh, but she learned to survive, one quiet step at a time. Nia didn't tell anyone who she used to be. No one knew she once wore tailored suits and attended board meetings. No one knew she used to live in a house with marble floors. She kept her past locked away because, in this new life, no one cared about who she was before. People only saw the woman with tired eyes and worn shoes. One gray morning, after a long night with no sleep, Nia walked through the city in the rain, looking for work. Her hair was soaked, her shoes squished with every step. As she passed by a cafe, she stopped for a moment to rest. Through the glass window, she saw something that made her heart twist. David, her ex-husband. He was sitting at a table, laughing with his new wife. They looked perfect, sipping coffee and holding hands, the kind of couple she and David once were. For a moment, she thought about walking away. But just as she turned, he looked up. Their eyes met. David's smile didn't fade. He leaned back in his chair, smirked, and mouthed the words, "You see? Life rewards the strong." The words cut deeper than she expected. Nia stood there for a second, frozen, rain dripping down her face like tears. Then she took a slow breath, turned around, and kept walking. Her steps were steady, her face calm. Under her breath, she whispered, almost like a secret, "No, David. Life rewards the patient." She didn't look back. The rain kept falling, washing away her tears and the pain that once ruled her heart. Every drop that hit her skin felt like a reminder that storms don't last forever. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet strength began to grow, something fiercer than anger, stronger than pride. As she walked away from that cafe, Nia didn't know how or when, but she knew one thing for sure. Her story wasn't over yet. Weeks passed, and Nia's life fell into a quiet rhythm. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, tied her hair with a worn-out ribbon, and walked to the small supermarket where she worked as a cleaner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. She liked the routine, sweeping the pavement, greeting early shoppers, and pretending not to notice when people avoided eye contact with the cleaner. That morning, the sky was clear, the air still cool from the night before. Nia was sweeping dust off the front steps when she heard the low purr of an engine behind her. A sleek black Mercedes slowly pulled up to the curb. It was the kind of car she used to see from her office window, back when life was different. She didn't pay much attention. Rich people stopped by all the time. But then the door opened, and a tall man in a gray suit stepped out. He looked out of place in this part of town, well-dressed, calm, and carrying a brown envelope. He walked toward her with a polite smile. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Nia Mwend?" Nia straightened, holding the broom tightly. "Yes, why?" she asked cautiously. The man nodded, relief in his eyes. "You've been very hard to find. My name is Mr. McCona. I'm with the law firm Tambo and Partners." For a moment, Nia just blinked, unsure what to say. No one from a law firm had any reason to find her. She was nobody now, just a woman trying to survive. Mr. McCona reached into his briefcase and handed her the envelope. "This is for you," he said. "Please read it carefully." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The paper inside was thick, formal, and stamped in gold. Her eyes scanned the words slowly, almost afraid to believe what she was reading. You are the sole beneficiary of the late Dr. Grace Mwangi's estate, valued at $50 million US. For a moment, time stopped. The broom slipped from her hand, clattering on the pavement. She stared at the letter, her voice barely a whisper. This must be a mistake. Mr. Makona's expression softened. It's not a mistake, Ms. Mwend. Dr. Grace Mwangi was your birth mother. The world around her seemed to blur. The noise from the street faded, replaced by the rush of her heartbeat. Her birth mother? She had always known she was adopted, but her adoptive parents never spoke much about it. And now, after all these years, a stranger was telling her that her real mother, a woman she'd never met, had left her a fortune. Nia took a shaky breath, her eyes filling with tears. For the first time in a long while, she didn't know whether to cry, laugh, or fall to her knees. All she could manage was a whisper. Who is she? Mr. Makona smiled gently. A remarkable woman, he said, and she wanted you to have the life she never could. Nia sat on the curb outside the supermarket, the letter still trembling in her hand. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning in circles. Mr. Makona stood quietly beside her, giving her time to breathe. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide and unsure. I don't understand, she said softly. My mother died when I was little. At least, that's what I was told. Mr. Makona nodded gently. The woman who raised you wasn't your biological mother. You were adopted as a baby. The words hit her like a wave. She stared down at the letter again, as if the truth might change if she read it differently. Adopted, she whispered. But, who is Dr. Grace Mwangi? He took a deep breath. Dr. Mwangi was a brilliant Kenyan scientist, he said. She worked on major research projects in environmental health and women's education. Years ago, during a time of political unrest, she went missing. Many thought she was dead, but she resurfaced quietly years later, living under protection. She never remarried and never had other children. You were her only one. Nia's throat tightened. She could barely process the words. So she knew about me? She remembered me? Mr. Makona smiled faintly. She never stopped looking for you. Before she passed, she left a sealed file with our firm. Inside were your adoption papers, your last known address, and a handwritten note. He opened his briefcase and pulled out another envelope, older and thinner than the first. It said one thing, he continued. Give my daughter her wings. Those 6 words broke something inside Nia. She pressed her hands to her face as tears spilled down her cheeks. For so long, she had felt invisible, like the world had erased her. But now, hearing that someone somewhere had loved her enough to search for her, it was almost too much to bear. She wanted you to have this, Mr. Makona said softly, placing the file in her lap. Her estate, her home, her land in Kenya, it's all yours. But more than that, she wanted you to know who you are. Nia couldn't speak. The sounds of traffic, the chatter of shoppers, all of it faded into a quiet hum around. She thought about her life, the fall, the struggle, the sleepless nights in the shelter, and now this. Her mother had left her not just money, but a message of hope. For the first time in years, Nia didn't feel lost. She felt seen, as if someone had been watching over her all along. The tears came freely now, a mix of pain, disbelief, and relief. She looked at Mr. Makona and whispered, All this time, I thought I had no one. He smiled kindly. You always had someone, he said. You just didn't know it yet. And for the first time, Nia felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. Within a few weeks, Nia's world changed in ways she could never have imagined. One day, she was sweeping supermarket floors. The next, she was moving into a beautiful penthouse in Santun, overlooking the city lights. Everything felt unreal. The polished marble floors, the soft scent of fresh flowers, the quiet hum of luxury. But this time, she wasn't the same woman who once lived for status and comfort. She had learned what it meant to lose everything, and that knowledge kept her grounded. Mr. Makona helped her set up meetings with financial advisors and they guided her through paperwork, investments, and properties she didn't even know she owned. For the first time in years, people treated her with respect again, but she didn't crave it anymore. Money wasn't her master now. It was a tool, and she planned to use it wisely. She also began therapy. At first, she found it hard to talk about the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, the nights she cried herself to sleep. But with time, she began to heal. Her therapist told her, You don't need to rebuild your old life, Nia. You're building a new one. Those words stuck with her. Instead of shopping or showing off her wealth, Nia quietly started visiting women's shelters, the same kind that once gave her a bed when she had nowhere to go. She didn't tell anyone who she was or how much money she had. She just listened to the women's stories, held their hands, and sometimes paid for their children's school fees without saying a word. Later, she began sponsoring young girls from Soweto, helping them finish school or start small businesses. It became her new purpose, lifting others the way she wished someone had lifted her. She didn't want fame, she wanted meaning. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. One morning, her face appeared in the newspapers. Former bank manager inherits multi-million-dollar fortune. Her phone began to buzz with messages, some from strangers, some from old friends who had once ignored her. Among them was one name she thought she'd never see again. He called her several times before finally sending a message. "We should talk, Nia. Maybe I overreacted. I've missed you." When they eventually met, he looked smaller than she remembered, nervous, unsure, a shadow of the man who once gloated at her downfall. He smiled awkwardly, trying to sound casual. "You look amazing, Nia. Maybe we could start over." She looked at him for a long moment, calm and steady. Then she gave a small smile, not cruel, just certain. "You didn't overreact, David," she said softly. "You underestimated." She stood, gathering her bag. As she walked away, David just sat there, speechless. For Nia, it wasn't revenge. It was closure. She had fallen, risen, and rebuilt herself, not to prove anything to him, but to finally be free. It was a bright Sunday morning when Nia decided to visit the cafe she hadn't stepped into since the day her ex-husband humiliated. Back then, she had stood outside in the rain, broken and invisible. Now, she walked with calm confidence, dressed in a simple white suit that glowed softly in the sunlight. It wasn't about showing off. It was about peace. She was finally ready to face the past without fear. As she entered, the soft sound of chatter filled the air. People looked up, curious. Something about her presence made heads turn. She carried herself with quiet strength, graceful, poised, unbothered. When she smiled at the waitress, the young woman almost froze before hurrying to greet her. Nia chose a seat by the window, the same spot where David once sat laughing with his new wife. She ordered tea and waited, not for anyone, but for the moment itself, the full-circle peace she'd earned. Minutes later, she heard a familiar voice. David. He was sitting across the room, alone this time, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. When he finally looked up and saw her, his eyes widened. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He stood, almost knocking over his chair. "Nia, you look." She smiled, cutting him off gently. "Alive," she said. "I am." The cafe went completely silent. Even the barista paused mid-step. Everyone could feel the weight of the moment, how life had turned, how the woman once crushed by betrayal now stood taller than ever. David swallowed hard, trying to find words, but Nia had already turned her attention to something else. She reached into her purse, took out a folded check, and placed it on the table. "This isn't for you," she said calmly. "It's for the cafe owner's daughter. I heard she wants to study medicine, but can't afford tuition." The owner, standing nearby, gasped softly. "Miss, I don't know what to say." Nia smiled kindly. "Say you'll let her chase her dreams." David stared at her, guilt flickering in his eyes. "You're really something, Nia," he said quietly. "You could have destroyed me, but instead you're helping people?" She met his gaze steadily. "Some people invest in revenge," she said. "I invest in purpose." With that, she picked up her purse, thanked the waitress, and walked out. The white suit shimmered under the sunlight as she stepped back onto the street, her chin high, her heart light. Behind her, the cafe buzzed with whispers, but Nia didn't hear them. She wasn't walking away from her past anymore. She was walking toward her future. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely free. A few months later, Nia boarded a flight to Kenya, the country where her birth mother, Dr. Grace Mwangi, had lived and worked. The journey felt emotional before it even began. As the plane soared above the clouds, she looked out the window and whispered to herself, "I'm coming home." When she arrived in Naivasha, she was met by Mr. Makona and an elderly woman named Asha, who introduced herself as her mother's close friend. Asha's eyes were kind, filled with warmth and something deeper, recognition perhaps. She had known Grace well, and had waited years to meet the daughter her friend never stopped talking about. They drove for hours through open fields and winding country roads until they reached the land that once belonged to Dr. Mwangi. It was breathtaking, acres of green farmland stretching toward the horizon, kissed by the sun and the wind. Birds moved across the sky in graceful arcs, and in the distance, workers tended to the crops that Grace had once planted. Nia stepped out of the car and stood silently, her heart swelling with emotion. She walked slowly across the grass, taking it all in, the smell of the earth, the rustle of the leaves, the feeling of connection she hadn't known she was missing. Asha walked beside her and said softly, "Your mother loved this place. She built it with her own hands, and she dreamed that one day you would see it." Nia turned to her, tears already forming. "She knew about me?" Asha nodded. "Oh, my child, she never stopped looking for you. She spent years searching, writing letters, hiring people to find you. But her health began to fail before she could reach you. She wanted to hold you one last time." The words pierced Nia's heart. She sank to her knees, pressing her hands into the soil. The ground felt warm, alive. She could almost feel her mother's spirit there, watching proud. "I'll make her proud," Nia whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise." Asha placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You already are," she said quietly. In that moment, Nia made a decision. She wouldn't let her mother's legacy fade. Using part of her inheritance, she began building something new, the Grace Foundation for Women in Crisis. It would help women who had lost everything, just as she once had. It would provide shelter, education, and hope to those who needed it most. Months later, the land was alive again, not just with crops but with purpose. Women worked the fields, learned new skills, and rebuilt their lives. Children played under the trees. And every time Nia walked through the foundation gates, she felt her mother with her. Standing on that soil, she finally understood. Grace Mwangi hadn't just given her money. She had given her a mission. While Nia's life was rising again, David's world was quietly falling apart. After their divorce, he had married quickly, someone younger, glamorous, and eager to enjoy the lifestyle he once built with Nia's help. With his new wife by his side, David started a business that he bragged would make him richer than ever. He spoke loudly at parties, laughed too easily, and told everyone he was winning. But beneath all that confidence was recklessness. He invested heavily in a risky project, a deal that promised huge profits but required cutting corners and borrowing more money than he could afford. For a while, things looked good. Investors praised him, magazines featured him, and his ego grew even bigger. But greed has a way of catching up. The deal went bad, the market turned against him, and within months, his company collapsed. The same people who once toasted to his success now avoided his calls. Lawsuits followed, banks demanded repayment, and one by one, his accounts were frozen. Rumors spread quickly. David Mathoni bankrupt. His wife, who had once flaunted designer bags and luxury trips, didn't stick around to face the chaos. She packed her things and left him without a goodbye. Soon, David found himself living in a small apartment on the edge of town, surrounded by silence. The man who once owned 2 cars now took taxi. The man who once mocked his ex-wife now had no one to call. One afternoon, he was walking through the city, lost in thought, when something caught his eye. A massive billboard stood above the highway. On it was a familiar face, Nia's. She was smiling, radiant, confident. The sign read, Grace Foundation, changing lives one woman at a time. David froze. Cars rushed by, horns blaring, but he didn't hear them. He just stood there, staring up at the woman he once broke. She was stronger now, brighter, untouchable. A lump formed in his throat. He whispered to himself, that could have been me beside her. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He hadn't loved Nia for who she was. He had loved what she gave him, the comfort, the image, the success. When life got hard, he left her behind without a second thought. Now, as he looked up at her face shining over the city, he finally understood the difference between them. Nia's strength came from pain, patience, and growth. His power had come from pride, and pride never lasts. He turned away slowly, the wind brushing past his face. The city lights glowed in the distance, but none of them were for him anymore. Nia had found her purpose. David had lost his. And in that quiet, bitter moment, he realized that losing Nia wasn't the end of his success. It was the start of his downfall. The morning was calm at the Grace Foundation. Sunlight poured through the large windows as women chatted softly in the courtyard. Children laughed in the play area, and volunteers moved around with purpose. Nia sat in her office reviewing project reports when her assistant knocked gently on the door. There's a man asking to see you, she said. He says his name is David. Nia paused, her pen frozen midair. She hadn't heard that name in a long time. A part of her thought she'd never have to. She took a slow breath and said quietly, send him in. When David walked through the door, he looked nothing like the man she once knew. The confident banker was gone. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes tired, and his shoulders hunched from the weight of defeat. He hesitated before speaking. Nia, he said softly, almost pleading. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have stood by you. Please, just help me start again. For a long moment, Nia said nothing. She simply studied him, the man who once left her with nothing, now standing before her with empty hands. There was no anger in her eyes, only calm understanding. Finally, she spoke. I forgive you, David, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But forgiveness isn't a bridge back. It's a door I close peacefully. David's eyes filled with regret. I've lost everything, he murmured. The company, the house, even my wife. I just need one more chance. Nia reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small white envelope. She stood, walked toward him, and placed it in his hand. There's a check inside, she said. It's enough to help you get back on your feet. He looked at her, surprised. You're helping me? She nodded. Not because you deserve it, she said softly, but because I can afford to be kind. He lowered his head, shame washing over him. You're a better person than I ever was. Nia smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just learned what real strength looks like. He looked around the office, at the photos of women rebuilding their lives, at the quote on the wall that read, Grace rebuilds what pain destroys. He realized then that Nia had built something far greater than success. She had built peace. As he walked out of the foundation, the sound of laughter followed him. He looked back one last time, watching Nia through the glass window as she bent down to greet a young girl. The light seemed to follow her wherever she went. In that moment, David understood the truth he had avoided for years. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the kind of woman money can't buy: strong, compassionate, and finally free. And for the first time in his life, David walked away quietly, with nothing left but regret. The sun was shining over Johannesburg as a crowd gathered in front of a beautiful new building. The sign above the entrance read Grace Haven, a women's center built to give hope, safety, and a second chance to those who had lost everything, just like Nia once did. Dressed in a soft cream suit, Nia stood at the front, surrounded by laughter, music, and bright faces. Dozens of women who had once been homeless now worked here as counselors, teachers, and caregivers. Children ran across the courtyard, their voices full of joy. The air was alive with celebration. As the ribbon was cut, applause filled the space. Cameras flashed, and a reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Ms. Mwend," he asked with a smile, "how did you turn pain into purpose?" Nia looked around at the women and children, her eyes shining. She paused for a moment before answering. "When life takes your home," she said softly, "it might be making room for a kingdom." The crowd fell silent, moved by her words. Then, as music began to play, children from the Foundation's school started singing a song about hope and new beginning. Their voices carried through the air like a prayer. Nia turned her gaze toward the sky, a peaceful smile on her face. Her voice echoed in the background, gentle and strong. "I thought I lost everything when I lost my house. I didn't know I was being prepared to inherit the world." The camera slowly panned over the building, the smiling faces, the waving children. The scene shimmered with light, a picture of grace, justice, and rebirth. And as the music swelled, it was clear, Nia Mwen's story had come full circle. She had not just risen again, she had lifted others with her.